you lose morality when you go to war. And that, for me, I always told myself I would leave it there.
War stories are easy to tell. There's action, adventure, and good versus evil. But for most veterans, their service isn't defined or explained by their war stories. For most veterans, the story that is by far the most difficult to write and to live is the story they have to write themselves.
The hardest interview I ever did was not with a congressman or a cabinet secretary or a general. It was with this woman, close friend of mine, became named. What do you hope is the result of this movie?
I hope for veterans that see it, that they feel seen and heard, and that they know that they're not alone.
In this episode, I sat down with Steven Grayhm, writer and director of Sheepdog, a film dedicated to telling the most difficult story of our veterans. The story of what happens to us, our families, our friends, and those around us when the war stories fade, reality sets in, and the hard work must actually begin.
Did we achieve what we were supposed to? Was it all for nothing?
So I'm going to share a story with you that I've never told, because there's a reason why I put that in the film.
Steven, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate what you've done here. And we're going to talk a lot about Sheepdog, the movie, which is going to come out here in the next couple of days. But there are few films that really, I believe, capture the essence of what it means to be a veteran. I think that we have a lot of film writers who capture various aspects of soldiering, of what it's like to go to combat, the glorification of war. It is very, very hard to tell the story of what it's like to come home.
Mm-hmm.
I have said time and time again as we've started this podcast, as I've had to go through my transition journey, which I can't believe we're coming up on 10 years
Good for you.
now.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to still be so connected to the community. It feels like yesterday. The hardest thing I ever have done wasn't to become a Green Beret. It was to not be a Green Beret.
Yeah. Amen.
For so many of the reasons that you highlight in this film. But I want to start with, why did you want to make this movie?
Yeah. So I would say, like, going back into my youth, I think that the foundation was laid in my early years. Like, my grandfather was a POW of the Second World War. He was a Polish farmer. And I grew up to his stories when I was young, of his survival, and my grandmother's survival of being captured, held captive on their own land at one point, being tortured. And then, of course, the liberation from the Allied forces and American troops. And so, you know, that stays with you for life. And I think that at some point in my life, there likely would have been a call to action within me as my thank you. Because I wouldn't be sitting here with you if it hadn't have been both for the liberation of Europe, but also his survival instincts to make it to North America, you know, during those 5 years. So in 2011, my car broke down 3 hours north of Los Angeles. I was shooting a movie in Vancouver as an actor for a month, and I wrapped, and I drove through the night. And, you know, I'm tired, car overheats, pull over on the side of the 5 freeway, call AAA. They send out the local tow guy. And he was, you know, he was just like, saddle up, partner. We got a long ride into town. And you got to know too, they don't normally get these calls. I had like a AAA plus, right, to get you into, you know, 3 hours of towing.
It's desolate out there between
to say
Fresno and LA.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's like
I know exactly what it is.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm good, and, you know, I'm just tired, and I'm nodding off, and he began to open up about his own life, his challenges of being a father of 3, some of the marital issues he was experiencing, financial hardship, and then he began to open up about the various medications that he was on that were tethered to his service, his military service, and his deployments. And he had only been back, I think, like at that point, since 2011. So I think like he'd only been back a year and a half. So he just transitioned out. And I don't think I said like 3 words. I just listened. And throughout that entire conversation, he would remark, I can't believe I'm telling you this, man. Like, I don't even know you. And I can't believe I have never told my wife, and I haven't told a therapist. And so by the time we got back to LA, I thanked him for getting me home safe and for being so open and sharing. And I was, as a civilian, you don't know what to do. And I was like, brother, I'm here for you. And I really meant that. And I was like, if you ever want to go for a beer, I'm here. I'll come see you or whatever. And there was a look in his eyes that I was certain that he was comforted by the fact that he would likely never see me again. And that was a very sort of learned moment to be like, oh, it's easier to tell somebody that will listen to you without prejudice and not judge you than it would be to somebody in your direct circle. That was the seminal moment. And that summer of 2011, I went on a nationwide road trip with my co-star in the film, Matt Dallas, to uncover the truth, to see if there were more men and women like this tow truck driver that were suffering in silence, folks that had served their country honorably, come home and felt so disconnected from their families, their communities, even from their brothers that they served with. And that summer, we set out to uncover that truth, which became the foundation for Sheepdog.
Well, you cover a lot in this film when you talk about scars of combat, going through and understanding the highest highs, the lowest lows. You talk about tribes and the difference between tribes and friendship and what that truly means, and addiction to drugs and alcohol, TBIs, the tie into CTE, how that's led to so many other medical challenges that our veterans face. When we look at our veteran community, and you mentioned you have the chance to sit down with so many folks, talk more about the research, because you didn't serve, and neither did Matt.
No.
And now you have to become, in order to really pull this off, an expert on something that at the outset, very little.
Terrifying. I mean, from the very first veteran that we met with in McAllen, Texas, it became very personal very quickly. And we were very aware that we had bit off more than we could chew. We had no medical background. I mean, not in, trauma, psychology, neurology, none of that, right? We were just idealistic. And so our intentions were pure because we had no agenda, but to be in service of veterans like yourself, to understand your plight. That was it. And so the research began that first road trip where we were willing to speak to anybody and everybody who would speak with us. And we took it very seriously. We learned very quickly not to set up cameras, because the moment you put a camera on somebody, it just becomes a different thing. And we worked really, really hard to build trust. And we were very fortunate that folks stuck their necks out for us. And we would meet, give you an example, when you meet with certain groups of guys that, serve in the same unit and are all over the country, they may call another guy they served with in their unit saying, hey, I can vouch for these guys. I know, I think that what they're doing, could be really helpful to our community.
The word's good dude. When you hear good dude.
Yeah, he's solid.
Yeah.
He's wicked smart. But anyway, so then Gold Star Families did that for us. And then that first road trip, I walked into the VA in Detroit, and I don't know what, I mean, I look back on it now of how ridiculous we must have sounded to them, but I was just trying to make allies, just trying to understand the system. And was very lucky that a lady, Lisa Only, that was one of the heads of that particular VA, had taken a chance on us. She spoke to Dr. Tara Consolino, who's now a very close friend, who also loosely inspired Virginia Madsen's character as a trauma therapist in it. So it was baby steps. But over the course of years, I was able to turn like a custodian's broom closet into an office. And I would go there, stay in Detroit for sometimes a month at a time, and role play with doctors. and veterans, and just absorb it. And over that time, you become a fly on the wall. So if for any cynics listening, yes, in the beginning, I'm sure that you would expect the VA to present the best possible veneer, if you will. I'm telling you, what I saw was the unsung heroes. It was the folks that were showing up every day to work, trying to make a difference in earnest and making breakthroughs, some of them with our veterans. Getting in my research, getting to, in that role playing, to undergo EMDR treatments, prolonged exposure. I mean, you just, to really fully understand what it is. And then then you get into all the medications that are being prescribed and why, and what does that do? And what does this do, to try to fully understand the full scope of it. And then, of course, trying to make an entertaining story that can take place in 2 hours.
Well, the VA is a complicated place.
Yeah.
We've been really fortunate on this show to be able to sit down with Secretary Doug Collins, the Secretary of the VA, and really hear from his perspective, what are the challenges that the VA faces? How are they combating those with this administration? How are they balancing the needs that are very different between generations? And when I talk about generations, we talk about the Vietnam generation, and we talk about we call it the post-war, post 9/11 generation, the global war on terror generation, and then that generation in between, who was trained and brought up by the Vietnam generation, had the Gulf War, and then had to transition to counterterrorism operations, which was much different than what the military had done in the past, especially for the previous few decades. You address the differences between those two generations.
Oh, sure.
Between the Vietnam generation and the post 9/11 generation, when you have Calvin and Whitney, as two of the main characters here, and the bond that they form, which transcends those generations. Why was that such an important part of the story for you? Because you saw that, and I want you to tie it back into the VA, because I know that's what you saw when you sat in the VA, when you saw those two different types of people there.
Oh, sure. Just sit in a waiting room, and you just that right there is it's just very eye-opening. Look, I thought it was important to hold the mirror up to show what I saw. So, for instance, Vondie Curtis Hall's character, Whitney St. Germain, plays a Vietnam veteran, and I had done multiple honor flights to DC out of Austin. So you take, for those that don't know, you chaperone Vietnam veterans and World War II veterans to their respective memorials in DC. Spend a weekend together. They are yours to take care of. You share a hotel room. It's very intimate. So in that time, you become, if you're lucky, fast friends. It starts off very emotional. Or if you're going to the wall, you can imagine that some of these folks haven't been on a plane, some of them, in these rural areas since they served, since that plane back home from their service, right? So it's heavy, but it's also beautiful. And if you're so lucky to be invited down to the hotel lobby bar for a whiskey on that first night, that's where you take it all in. And I was very open with a lot of the Vietnam veterans that I was explaining, like I was writing a film on the subject matter and so on, and they were all so gracious and so open. I will say, though, that in all of that, I did get to see the differences, because sometimes you have like OIF and OEF vets that are also chaperoning. I was a civilian, so they get to see it themselves, of the differences as the chaperone, right? You'll see the difference between World War II veterans and Vietnam veterans. I'll give you an example. We had a scenario where a couple of guys were arguing, and one of the World War II veterans was just ripping on one of the Vietnam vets, and he was like, "Hey, we didn't get to come home until we won the war. You went on a tour?" And to a civilian, you're like, whoa, you don't even. Yeah. Then you have the OIF and the OAF guys that are like, the Vietnam vets are like, well, you weren't dropped into a jungle with like trench foot malaria, reptiles. I mean, you just keep going on, right? So again, but that's it, respectively in their own worlds, comparing their differences, but also their similarities of sacrifice and service, right? So I thought it was important in the film that, yes, some of those things can be humorous, but also it's like walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. And I wanted the audience to understand that it's not one size fits all. And that your experience, even as a Green Beret, is incredibly different than somebody else's. But your sacrifice, sitting down at a table, and the courage it takes to make that sacrifice is similar.
One of the refrains of the film is this concept that pain is relative.
Yeah.
And yet you have kind of the second part of that is here behind us. Or sometimes we have to fall apart to find ourselves all over again.
Yeah.
A lot of times people will say, what's the number one thing you take away from serving, from being in the military? The answer I give them is perspective.
Yeah.
I always have from the day I got out
good.
till today that it's perspective.
Yeah.
You understand a different perspective on the world, on challenges that you face, on what truly is hard, versus what can we find a solution to and how are we going to do that? Why was bringing that concept into the film really important when we talk about, the different perspectives that you have, whether it be from a civilian, whether it be from those various generations, or even from the caregivers themselves?
It had been described to me for some folks as walking through the portal. And that's what Whitney has that line in the film. And that could mean various things. First of all, in somebody's service, your discipline, right? Then it's like, if you are, not all folks that serve are in combat, but if you have, and things very quickly become, the most important thing is to your guide, to your left and to your right. Most civilians can't understand that concept of what that really means. Most civilians can't understand the concept of jumping over 6-foot cinder block walls during a village sweep at 3 a.m. Like that you're playing the ultimate extreme sport.
Yeah.
And these are ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, which makes you essentially extraordinary because the courage that takes. The pain aspect of it is that, we say this in trauma, and I've learned this, that we don't compare our traumas, and that's why pain is relative, right? And trauma does not have to come, and your pain does not have to come from your military service. It could have been something from your childhood. It could be just your family dynamic, the loss of a friend, whatever it is. But why it was important to address that was that how we handle it is really important. How we cope, how we soothe, that's really important. So when Whitney says in the film, from the warrior on the battlefield with a 1,000-yard stare to the cosmonaut who breaches the unknown, because that was a bit about once you've gone into space and you've seen it all, your perspective, as we talk about, entirely changes. And it was a part I actually had cut out in the film because it was too lengthy, but Whitney goes on about Buzz Aldrin, how he came home and God bless him, but became an alcoholic. And for a lot of people, for even me, it was like, wow, you breached the unknown. And was it living with the insignificance of our existence? Like, what is it? And your perspective. And I have to tell you, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because for those that have summited the mountain and touched the fire, that's what they talk about, is your perspective. And I think it's important to share, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I'm just to say that perspective sometimes can be very painful because you're living life unfiltered now. But at the same time, when we talk about post-traumatic growth in the film, it's also a sense of enlightenment, your perspective. You're not going to waste time. Is precious to you now, right? And how you look at your relationships with people, what matters to you most, family, relationships, commitment to service, your business, providing as a father, whatever it is. I feel like that can be also a gift that folks get from their service.
I'd say that was one of the things that struck me the most in watching the film, but also truly understanding that there are a lot of things that when you're a young soldier, or Marine, airmen.
Yeah.
We have Guardians now, which didn't exist when I was in, or wherever you serve, sailors too. There's just things you don't think about.
Yeah.
You are trained, and again, I think it's another kind of subtle undertone of the film is you're trained to do a job, but they train you so well to do that job that you never really understand what the result of that job actually looks like until you're there in that first moment. And I mean, I recall, I haven't told this story not too many times, but I was a infantry platoon leader in combat in my first time. And the only thing I wanted to do was get in a firefight.
Wow.
Until the very first firefight.
Sure.
Because you go through years of training, you go to ranger school, you're a badass.
Sure.
And you're ready to bring it.
Yeah.
And then it gets brought.
Yeah.
And for that split moment, that's about the last place on earth that you actually want to be.
Yeah.
Until that training kind of kicks in, and then you realize, hey, we got a job to do here, or we're not going to get out of here.
Yeah.
But we all kind of have to go through that in your combat experience to start to put in really get you to understand that, hey, there's a very real result to the training and what has been ingrained into us up to this moment. And I think that comes through in the film, and it's something that needs to truly be understood. You talk in the film about you lose morality when you go to war, and that for me, I always told myself I would leave it there.
Yeah.
And I say somewhat in jest to folks, that maybe that will mess me up later in life, that'll come to fruition, who knows.
Yeah.
But I always told myself that, and I remember the very first deployment, I got to the base of the airplane, we took the steps up, and I stopped and I paused for a second, and I said, whatever happens on the other side of this, I'm going to leave.
Wow.
It's going to be there. And I remember coming home and stepping off that plane, off that last step, and just kind of in my mind shedding that.
Good for
and
you.
Just saying, look, that was there. This is this alternate reality. And I kind of told myself that every deployment that I had, everything that I went and did over my nearly 13-year career that I had. And I don't know if that's the best way to handle what you experience, what you see, because another thing you talk about is that, feelings are normal, trauma's not.
Yeah.
And you see things that you can't prepare for that live with you. But to me, I always felt like this is reality. There are real results here. Some of my friends didn't come back.
Yeah.
Other guys in my platoon, in my unit, got injured and left the battlefield that night, and I didn't see them for 6-8 months.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
Some I never saw again.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very real result to that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are things that are happening in that reality that are not out here in, Western Massachusetts, in LA and New York. You don't have the power of arrest. You don't have the ability, I do a lot of work with law enforcement now. A law enforcement officer draws their weapon in line of duty. They're under investigation, even if they don't use that weapon.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were in a job where it was expected that you would draw your weapon, use your weapon, inflict casualties on the other side.
Yeah.
And then get in your truck and go home.
Yeah.
Eat a sandwich, right? Go to your room and do it again.
Yeah.
It's a very different place.
Yeah. And I think that was part of my fascination, but also once we were in the research, once we were neck deep, you're like, this is a responsibility. Right. And that was for me, one of the most challenging things in this journey of Sheepdog was getting it right. Because just one false note, you're toast. lost your audience, and I had studied not only the films in our genre to understand what doesn't work, what does work, but also in trying to tell a truthful and authentic story that would be in service of all the folks I sat in front of. But you just humanizing right now. So this is worth talking about. So for any of the cynics that listen to this, that especially for civilians that are because Sheepdog is not a political film, and that was part of why I think, when we went into it, the only agenda was to tell the truth, your truth, whoever we sat in front of, right? It was not, we didn't come into it like, oh, what would be a cool story to tell, or influences, outside influences, right? We made this movie entirely outside the Hollywood system. I didn't get studio notes. I got notes from the real folks that were, in these scenarios. Okay. So, but my feeling is that for the cynic that would be listening to have judgment on any of these conflicts from Vietnam to OIF or OEF, the warrior doesn't get to choose the war they go into. You are of service to the country. And you go and you do your best, you do everything that you're trained to do, and you try to bring everybody home with you. And I don't like to simplify it that way, but the truth is like just even sitting here with you right now in jeans and a hoodie and thinking there was a time you were in uniform probably kicking down a door and trying to save, that to me I marvel at, right? Because that's not a movie. Right? You live that. That's real. Like the stakes are as high as they can ever be. And I'll never stop marveling at that. And I think that was important to show in our film, that this is so multi-layered. This is so multi-layered to be put in scenarios like that. And just as you described, get back in your truck, eat a sandwich back at the place, but then come home to your country and just be at a cookout, right, with all your friends, and you've just experienced something. Even if your last deployment was a year, 2 years ago, you've experienced something that, unless anybody else in that backyard has been there side by side with you, they will never have any comprehension of what that truly is. Yeah. And I really felt that in our storytelling, I was like, how do I bridge that from the civilian population to the veteran population, just to give them an idea without these massive battle scenes or something, you know what I mean? To speak to the war within the soul, to our humanity. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, let's go there next, because that's where I was actually going to go there. Yeah. I very much appreciate the fact that this is not a war movie.
Yeah.
This is not a combat movie. And I went into watching this film with really very little background on I understood the story, but I kind of didn't want to have any preconditions when I watched it, and I was waiting, especially in the first time where Calvin's sitting down with Dr. Knox and starts to talk about experiences, and I'm waiting to go to the flashback of the battle scene, and the combat, and it never went.
Yeah.
And I actually thought to myself, I'm so happy.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Because look, so I spent years writing these deployments. I was going to show you 3 deployments, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. And some really good advice, simple advice that was given to me from a friend of mine, Braden Aftergood, who was an executive producer on Lone Survivor. He was like, brother, if you get to a place where you don't have the budget to properly shoot those deployments, do not shoot them. No matter how many favors you can cut, just don't do it, because it'll be worse. It'll be a disservice to the community you're trying to honor. And that was told to me years ago. So as we got closer and closer to shooting, and the budget just kept evaporating before my eyes, I had to cut. Those were the most expensive scenes. But the gift of that was that all that work, it was some of my best writing in those deployments, and how layered they were and how much more it was going to reveal about the character, so I thought, lived with inside me, so that when I sat down on the day to shoot with Virginia Madsen, I saw that sheep pen. That was loosely inspired by a real military operation that went sideways. I had met with several of the guys in that unit and lived with one of them that saw it firsthand in Pennsylvania. And that was one take. Like, I saw it and I felt it. There was no acting. It wasn't like I never like looked down at my script of what I wrote. I had lived it. It would have haunted me in my nightmares for years, that crack in the sheep pen wall. And so you kind of get to a place where like there's no camera tricks. There's no, just speak from your heart and trust the words on the page that you spent years writing and being informed by real folks like yourself. And I had to just trust that. And I appreciate you saying that, because I think it made for a better film.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's talk about veteran suicide.
Yeah.
17 a day is where we sit, ish right now, depending on what organization's numbers you want to take, down from 22 a day. I recently gave a talk at an event raising funds for the prevention of veteran suicide. And I said, the very first thing I said was, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
I never
Yeah.
want to come here again.
Yep.
Because we're here for something that really should be avoidable. More veterans have taken their life that have been killed in combat on a magnitude. The multiple is egregious of how many we've lost post-service as compared to how many have been killed in combat.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a unacceptable number.
Mm-hmm.
You address veteran suicide in this film specifically, really through the relationship between Calvin and Daryl. And it is one of the most difficult, I would say, parts of being in the veteran community, is having to talk to the survivors of veteran suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part in here where you address it by saying that suicide doesn't stop things from getting worse. It eliminates the possibility of it getting better. The hardest interview I ever did was not with a congressman or a cabinet secretary or a general. It was with this woman, close friend of mine, became named Sarah Wilkinson. There was an early episode, and her husband was a Navy SEAL, Chad Wilkinson, and Chad died by suicide. And she talked about the anger and the fact that she had to forgive him, but blamed him for quitting on them and leaving her and her two children and giving up on the opportunity of finding some resolution and moving forward. Why was the inclusion of the suicide piece so important to the film?
So when I started this journey, the stat from 2012 came out in 2013 for 22 a day. And at the time, in my research, every time I talked about it, even when I would talk to the press, like nobody wanted to talk about it, right? The word suicide, it was like, especially you go on a morning television show, you'll see a producer behind the camera freak out the moment you start talking about that kind of stuff, right? So in my early, like, first of all, it's an astonishing, one is too many, let alone 17, let alone 22. But it was such a staggering statistic. And that also was like, but what's the why, right? And how is that happening? And so in those early years that built the foundation of like what the questions I was asking and the truth I was in search of, and, Matt and I and a handful of our friends that we were working with at the time started the 22 push-up challenge. And it began as, we called it like Sweat for Vets. And we changed it to the 22 push-up challenge because we were going into recruitment offices and pushing out 22 as a way to bring awareness to it. And it was at the time of the Ice Bucket Challenge. And we had worked with some VSOs that were highlighting that. But it was an attempt to make it more palatable if you could to be able to talk about it, right? Because it's kind of a dead end road, just for the same reason you didn't want to be at that place. It's very difficult. And I would be remiss to not share that in this journey, you figure 14 years to the screen, I have lost guys that I was very close with. I have been that last call, and fortunately have been successful in talking that individual off the ledge that night anyway. And I think it's important, and it was important in the film to address it, because the guys that I learned to be more worried about were the guys that smiled through the pain. Not the guys posting on Facebook all their problems, though that's valid and though you need to be heard and seen. It was the guys that would if you want to look at a Facebook post, it would be like, hey, anybody know of a good plumber? It would be just random things. You weren't going to hear it or see it. And that really informed me of just checking in and what that looks like. I stopped, for years, I never, ever shut my phone off at night or put it on silence for fear that I would miss that last call. In every situation that I lost somebody, and the community lost somebody, the veteran community, it would typically just be a text message of the person's name, and we all knew. And look, I don't have the answers, and I other than, I hope that the film, if anything, serves as a beacon of hope, that though I do go there in the storytelling with post-traumatic stress, I do also show you, based on what I've seen, and it is a long road traveled, but it's a worthy one, of the light at the end of that tunnel being post-traumatic growth. So I had to take the audience to a place to show them, and I also lived it, because the folks that I met with in 2011, many of them I still talk to this day, right? And the research didn't end in 2011. It continued on as I refined the screenplay. So I got to see so many people across the country, mental health workers, first responders, veterans, Gold Star family members, their communities. I got to see the journey, warts and all, the triumphs, the challenges. And that's why I thought it was really important to also be a film that I hadn't seen before, which picks up 10 years after the last deployment. Man, there's a lot of life that happens in that time, right? Not just the year after, when you're first transitioning. But to answer your question, it's complicated. And I get very nervous when people wax poetically about suicide, because it comes in all different forms. We all know oftentimes that the whispers lie. Other people's nightmares that they lived became my own as the storyteller, where you start to blur the lines of fact and fiction, where you're waking up in night sweats to something that never happened to you, happened to somebody else, but in your nightmare it becomes you. You start to take on that. And that was very eye-opening for me. And that's why I can sit here and do my best to talk to you about it, just from my own experience being very close to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the hardest part of that topic.
Yeah.
And even in my conversation with Secretary Collins at the VA, we talked extensively about suicide.
What did he say? I'm fascinated too.
It is, well, number one, the resources exist.
Yeah.
And,
which is important that we talk about. Yeah.
I think and I think you do a good job in the film of really showing that, look, these resources exist. The stigma of the VA not being there, not having the resources, they do exist. Now, as your character points out, all the resources in the world can exist, but it doesn't matter if you're not willing to use them.
Yeah. And
we see that in active duty. We see that in the veteran community. You see that, with retirees. And I think you see that cross-generationally. And oftentimes people will take on this persona, which I vehemently disagree with, that I'm a veteran, so I'm a victim.
Yeah.
Veterans are not
Yep.
victims. We're not victims. And I remind guys who talk to me like that, and I say, hey, man, you volunteered.
Yeah.
You volunteered. Now,
Mhm.
I'll give you that we volunteered for something we didn't fully understand
Sure.
what we were volunteering for.
But the courage that it takes to volunteer, let's
Right.
not like overstep that. Like that truly
Yeah.
is in that volunteering that you made a decision that most of us don't have it in us to make, truth be told.
Yeah.
And you did that. That already makes you already pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
But finding that self-value, right, is what you're saying is like it is, you are volunteering, but to take heed of that's a pretty amazing thing that you were willing to do that, right? Again, not knowing what conflict you could be sent in, if any, being away from your family, being away from like when you're 22 or 25 and you're in a conflict zone and your friends are back barbecuing that summer in Kentucky, drinking Bud Light, and you're in a foreign country with a target on your back and the stress and anxiety and yes, all the camaraderie and all that. But I mean, and I think that's because just not to get off on one, but I feel like that was why in the film is you would see no one feels sorry for themselves. These are not broken people. There are fragments, but they are not broken. And I tell you wholeheartedly, that's what I witnessed. This was not a mechanism of my storytelling of like, oh, let's make Calvin this. That's what I saw.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can get down some on yourself, but not how I had seen veterans depicted in film.
Yeah.
Right? As drug addicts. And I mean, the list goes on of all the tropes, but it was like, that's not what I saw. It's actually always opposite than what you think it is. Right? So the quiet guy sitting in the corner can be very personality type, the loudest guy in the room, without me getting into it, of like the personality types of what that is. But just getting back to it, what are your thoughts on it? And what, I'm not asking you for the answer, but what are your thoughts on how, when we talk about the resources, is it a matter, in your opinion, of we need to do better on making sure people know that care is there and that there are resources there? Like, I'm just curious. I'll share mine. But
I think we have to do better as the veteran to, number one, remove the victim mindset, to understand that this was a period in our life that we volunteered to do something that we didn't fully understand what we volunteered to do, but we went out and did it for a variety of different reasons. And we did it at a high level, and you came home and you entered a new chapter of your life. Now, let me get to the other point that you make in the story about grit, and about how sometimes the only way out is through it.
Yeah.
I became a Green Beret. Thousands have, millions have served in the Army. None of those journeys were easy. None of them were the same. Every one of us has a different path of service. We have different reasons why we come in. We're joined in a common bond. We go through the same experiences, but our perspective matters in how we tackle them. All of those things took grit.
Yeah.
Every single thing that we did, in the film, there's a lot about the medals, the Valor Awards, the Purple Hearts. Those things didn't come to people. They, as you said earlier, they came to ordinary people who did extraordinary things when they had no choice.
Correct.
Nobody leaves the base in the morning and goes, today I'm coming home with a Purple Heart because I was wounded in it.
Right.
Nobody goes out and says, I can't wait to earn my Valor Award.
Right. And almost anybody you speak to, they don't want those awards.
Correct.
Right. You're not hoping to get injured so you get a Purple Heart, or you're not wishing to be in a scenario to prove your courage. You know what I mean? At the loss of potentially your you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's yes.
So nobody wants those things. But in order to have gone through those experiences,
Yeah.
it took grit.
Sure
It
did.
took hard work.
Yeah.
It took them having an eye on the result.
Mm.
And then what happens, I think, to a lot of folks is they come back, they transition out, they adopt this victim mentality, and all of a sudden they lose sight of the fact that
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be hard work to assimilate into civilian society. The longer you serve, the harder it is. You weren't
Yes.
reprogrammed
Yeah.
to go to be a civilian.
Mm-hmm.
You were programmed to do a very specific thing that the nation asked you to do. And I served almost 13 years. Out processing is much better now, 10 years later. Out processing, especially for our Green Berets, is like 12 months, 18 months.
Yeah.
Like the programs that have been enacted,
Which is great.
Even since I got out, are tremendous. I think I had like a week.
Yeah.
And you sit through a couple of briefings.
Sure.
You read a couple of pamphlets.
Yeah.
And they're like, good luck.
Yeah.
Thanks for your service. And they show you the door and you leave and you're like, well, what now?
Yeah.
Now we have so many internships that guys take and so many different opportunities, but you still have to do the work.
Yeah.
You still have to understand that I took the uniform off, but just because I changed my clothes, it doesn't change who I am.
100%.
And it never goes away. You just have to change your perspective. You have to change how you live life every day. One of the things that I won't say I've worked hard. I do it, and I hope that one day other people will do it too, and they'll see that I do it, is I don't call Green Berets former Green Berets anymore.
I understand.
You're still a Green Beret.
Yeah.
You earned that Green Beret. It was not given to you.
Yeah.
Just because somebody took your ID card and they handed you a DD-214 and they said, you're not in the Army anymore, doesn't mean that you lack the character, the skills, the things that we look for. I run FR6, my security company, and I only want to hire Green Berets. Why? Because of all the reasons that the Army said they were going to be the most elite soldier in service. Well, I want them at my company.
Right.
Because they still have those things and they're ready to do the work. And I think when we look at veteran transition and it comes out towards the end, you have to do the work.
Yeah. And I think it's worth also mentioning that on the subject matter, that it's also going back to your week transition that you had and understanding. I don't want to oversimplify anything, but having a sense of purpose. You had that in the Green Berets. You had a sense of community, a brotherhood. You get transitioned out. I mean, I can tell you stories of getting a phone call from, an Army grunt who I became very close with, and he had seen some action, and he was, he was doing his best to, as a civilian, at this point, 2 years out, coping with that. Okay. And he called me and he was, worked up, and I'm like, hey, what's going on, brother? You okay? And, he's like, yeah, I just, and he had just started a job at like Bahama Breeze, and his responsibility, as he had said, had been reduced to like refilling your iced teas. And he was like, I had commanded my squad into combat. I was responsible for I got to hear about you need another iced tea refill. And I think that, to me, that was very poetic in a way of like, he's being underutilized.
Yeah.
So when we talk about care, and that's why when we talk about even serving at an elite level, right? Well, what fits that sort of training in the civilian world for you? So if that's owning a business and having employees and working in security, it's just like, I know Marine vets that came home, used the GI Bill, and became a lawyer, and then worked at a firm, and we're trying to, utilize organizational skills and so on but I think, and I'm, again, not to oversimplify, it's that time, that critical time, that you're trying to figure that out. And And that's really important for when we talk about community support to get you there. Because it's not just the care of like if you have a TBI and you don't know why you feel a certain way, and you're getting prescribed medications, you're irritable, you're hypervigilant. I mean, any of those sorts of reactions to potentially to trauma. But then that doesn't mean that you have to look at the environment. Like maybe you should not be working at that restaurant. Maybe there's a different environment for you. And but it's not a one size fits all, as we say, right? It's important to figure that out. And for me, I've just seen it more often than not that it's finding that sense of purpose that's critical. And that goes in hand with that brotherhood. If you're in a rural area, and I saw this a lot when I would go into small towns, and it's also why I wanted to shoot Sheepdog here in a mill town, because I had seen so much of those that served came from blue collar families, working class families, that had sacrificed the family, had sacrificed so much, especially when their kids are deployed to foreign countries, and I also saw the transition of coming home and trying to find work where maybe the economy's not great, and then you kind of potentially slip through the cracks. Then you're separated from your brothers that you served with. So that sense of community, civilians don't know how to really understand your experience. And so I say this because outside of like Facebook groups or how you can possibly find that connective tissue, how do you do that? And I would love to hear your thoughts, because I know that like with the American Legion and the VFW, those places were set up to give you a place that to go there and to fellowship and connect. And I found that a lot of the younger generation weren't interested in going into a bar to hear some old guy at the end of the bar on a bar stool talk about Vietnam or something. And I would always encourage the younger generation to go, but there's something in there though that you'd be amazed. And I've seen it when it happens, and it's beautiful, of that connective tissue of like that person, though different conflict, can understand you on a level that other folks can't. And I do, so I want to just hear your thoughts, because like, what is that modern day sweat lodge?
I think everyone's experience is different. You have to accept the fact that this journey is going to, you're embarking, just like when you go to basic training, you're embarking on an unknown journey of unknown duration, and unknown experiences.
Yeah.
And you have to embark on transition in very much the same way. And what I tell guys, and I've lived it, and I'll tell you about that in a second. I mean, I've lived it, like, you have to be okay. You talked about the concept we talk about, we hear a lot in the veteran community. You got to be okay not being okay.
Sure.
Well, you got to be okay not knowing what's next too. And we were really good about that in the military. And this is what's very interesting, especially when special operators do this all the time. I talk to guys, and they get really worked up about what they're going to do when they get out.
Right.
And they want to have some detailed plan. And I'll say, how many times did you have a detailed plan about what your career was going to look like in the Army?
Yeah.
Never. Almost never. Almost never did you know your next duty assignment. Did you know what the next project you were going to work? Almost never.
Yeah.
And yet our special operators will get up every day. They'll put their uniform on, don their beret, go to work, and tackle the unknown.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they look at transition and they're like, oh God, what do I do? I don't have a 2-year plan, a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan. And I say, guys, you got to do one thing. You just have to take first step. Okay, I got out of the Army on January 15th. It was a Friday. It was my last day. January 16th was my last day of service, according to my DD 214. And that Saturday, I drove from Colorado Springs to New York. Okay, you said that you can be lonely in rural Western Massachusetts. You can be lonely in New York City with 12 million people.
Absolutely.
And with a family.
Absolutely.
And have a family staring at you.
Yeah.
And be lonely.
Yeah.
And I had a week where I guess the only week I've been unemployed. And then I started the only job that I could get.
Which was
to be a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch.
Okay.
Somebody took a chance on me. guy named Rick Nelson. Changed my life. Continues to change my life. And the majority, this show wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Rick Nelson.
Oh, okay.
For a variety of reasons, primarily because he introduced me to the owner of Jersey Mike's, and he funded the first 2 years of this podcast.
Oh, wow.
So we would have never been able to do what
Thank
we did.
you.
So, but in a lot of ways, a lot of what I did is attributed to him. But he took a chance, and he said, "Look, somebody assessed you to be somebody of character who works hard and can get the job done. I know you know nothing about financial advisory, but I want you to come here and figure it out." Day one, 2:00 in the afternoon, a guy walked. I was sitting at a cubicle. Nobody had, I had nothing. Like, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Nobody was there to tell me what to do. And I was sitting there, and a guy came out of his office, swinging a putter with a we had the Bluetooth pieces back, like with the microphone back then, talking to somebody. And he looks at me, and he kind of gives me a little wink and, head nod, kind of give me the little, kiss thing. It was in New Jersey. So
Sure.
So you can imagine it was on the Jersey Shore.
Well, it was actually Jordan Belfort. And,
well, he thought he was.
Yeah.
And I looked at this guy, and I said, two things are going to happen. One One, I'm going to beat the shit out of this guy in the office, or two, I got to leave. And I packed up my stuff, and I walked down 2 blocks to the Starbucks, and I sat in the window, and I started crying. Oh, wow. Because I didn't know what I'd done. And I my whole world had changed. My last job, I was the aide to the 2-star general in charge of special operations in Africa. I was traveling the world with him, meeting foreign leaders, going to the places that don't exist and government buildings. And here I am in rural New Jersey with some dude out of the Jersey Shore treating me like I'm a piece of shit. And I'm a new guy. Yeah. And I sat there, and I hadn't, for a few minutes, no intention of going back. And I said, and then I thought about my career, my whole life kind of went through my head in these, I don't know, seems like an hour, it's probably 10, 15 minutes, as I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you did all these things in your life. You were a Division I collegiate athlete. You went in the Army. You were the honor graduate of Ranger School, the Special Forces qualification course. You were at the top of everything you did. And the only thing I thought to myself was, I never quit. I thought to myself, why did I have this? I get success, I guess, in my mind.
Sure.
And I came back to this thing, well, you never quit. Mm-hmm. And then I said, you know what? This isn't going to be forever. Mm. And I've never quit anything in my life. And today is not going to be the first thing that I quit.
Right.
I'm not going to be here I'm going to be here as short of amount of time as I can possibly be here. But I'm not going to quit today. Mm-hmm. And I packed my stuff, and I went back, and I lasted 18 months. I worked there while I went to business school, and that embarked on what is now a 10-year journey. Yeah, and that journey has been going to business school, working at Merrill Lynch, being the chief security officer at Snapchat in LA. Yeah, running a cannabis company for a Russian oligarch in LA, and then starting my own company. Yeah, I think I was a chief people officer of a outsourced accounting firm. I did work for my brother's company, and then I started this show, and I started my security company, and I still wake up every day and think about, I'm not at the end of my transition journey. I don't know where I am along that journey. I don't know where we're going to be tomorrow. Sure. But as you said earlier, 10 years to your character is a lot of life lived. Yeah. And a lot of experiences that I know I would have not been, and not all those were successful. Mm-hmm. Most of them were not. Yeah. Some of the hardest lessons I've learned personally and professionally have been in those 10 years. but I got through those because of the grit that I had as a veteran, because of my experiences in the Army, which showed me that you just have to push through it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to figure it out. You have to do it when it's 35 and raining, and you're cold and wet and tired,
Mm-hmm.
and you're hallucinating. You have to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
And so being in service isn't easy. Being a veteran isn't easy. Transitioning isn't easy. And I think that's my message to transitioning folks is nobody said when you join the Army or the Marines or the Navy or the Air Force, hey, guess what? You're about to embark on a very, unless it's the Air Force, you're about to embark on a very easy career in which it's going to be leisurely and you're going to get to do all the things you want to do. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true in life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true when you transition out.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also worth adding to that moment you had when you went down to the Starbucks that, look, I don't think if you had decided to quit, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you decided to stay and go back, either way. But I think the important takeaway as I sit here and listen to you tell that story is having a sense of yourself and your service and your worth, right? To know, like, I don't want to ever be that guy. I will never be that guy. But having the grit to go, but I don't have to be. I can go back into that office and I can learn, and thank God you did, from, somebody who became a mentor and somebody that would help. But having that sense of yourself, that you took a moment to yourself to go, whoa, 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 okay, I'm not, especially because you're fresh out, right? And you're trying to, again, not putting words in your mouth, but define what your next chapter is going to look like, right? But I think having a sense of yourself and knowing, because this is a big thing that I also, like a theme in the film, is having options and not feeling like you're stuck, right? Which can feel suffocating, where you feel like the walls are closing in on you, and having the option to leave that Starbucks and go home, and you'll just, figure it out. You look into a different, form of employment, or to go back into that office and go, you know what? I'm not going to beat the shit out of that guy. I'm going to go sit back in my cubicle. I'm going to see if there's something here I can learn. If I don't feel a certain way in a month from now, hey, I'll find something else out. But I'm good. I got it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe there's something here. And I think there's a lot of strength in that, because especially when you're first out, and I can only imagine you're questioning, maybe even subconsciously, your value in an environment, because your value in the environment you were trained in, and the value of every single guy you served with. You have to know their value. But in a civilian scenario, I get that, and I think that's really fascinating, and it's interesting how that path took you to sitting here today. Of having that fortitude to be like, hey, I'll be patient. I'll see how this goes.
Yeah, I don't think anyone expects you to have all the answers. I mean,
No.
I had a box when I left Colorado. I packed all of my, all the plaques they give you, all the stuff they give you when you change teams and units, all your awards and everything. I packed it all in one box, and that box sat unopened in my apartment in New York for a year.
Wow.
And I looked at it every day. I looked at it and I said, I never intended to open that box again.
Wow.
Because I had thought that I had to compartmentalize it so much.
Sure.
And then you start to realize, like, look, that was a different chapter. I can figure out what's next. I can be okay with that. I can come to grips with, the fact that that's not me. You said something a few minutes ago, which I think is important to bring up again. You said you have to figure out all the things that you did and what some of the you figure out the things that you did and what you're gonna in your past life be able to do now.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're right, but I also think you have to accept that there are certain things that you're never gonna do again.
100%.
There's nothing more exhilarating than riding in a Blackhawk
Yeah.
to an objective, and landing on someone's roof in their yard, blowing their door down, kicking it in, whatever you want to do. And I don't glorify combat. You'll never see that on this show. We don't tell war stories. You'll never hear me say that. You'll never hear me tell a war story. We'll never have someone on who tells a war story on the show. Not going to happen. But there's nothing more exhilarating than that.
Yeah.
Would I love to do it again? Hell yeah.
Right.
Am I going to? Unfortunately, I'm not.
Right.
And that's okay too.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of folks struggle in understanding that there's some things that you're just never going to get to do again.
Yeah. And thank you for
gotta
saying
be okay.
because that's important. Because that's like a lot of, you get that a lot, especially with the elite groups, especially because the training's just so intense and it's just the muscle memory that goes into all that. And it just becomes who you are. And I think it's important to say that because that's part of that, like, accepting that was that chapter in your life, right? And I know that there's also, we don't have to get into this, but like, I remember my earlier research of meeting with folks that had been in very stressful, high intensity situations during combat, and they came home and their adrenal glands are blown, so they're like just chasing whatever that is, whether it's burying the needle on a crotch rocket, or just doing things that could otherwise be described as dangerous to themselves, to others, and so on. But I think that like that description you just gave is like just knowing that, but then understanding, okay, it's not that, but how do I feel useful, right? Like or feel challenged, or especially if you hold yourself a certain way that you're like, I accomplished these incredible things. I don't need to pat myself on the back for it, but feeling that way. And then going, this job over here or this pursuit over here just doesn't fulfill me, right? And we don't all have to be fulfilled, but I think that for most of us, it's healthy to feel useful. Yeah.
There's one more thing I want to ask
Sure.
you about, and it comes up. It's an underlying theme of the film, but it comes up more towards the end, which is, was it all for nothing?
Mm-hmm.
Why bring that into the storyline? Because as we said, I'll ask you that and put a little bit more context. We are in a polarizing time for our service members.
Yeah.
The war, those of us who served in the post 9/11 generation went to combat for 20 years.
Yeah.
And you do have to ask yourself, why? Did we achieve what we were supposed to? Was it all for nothing?
So I'm going to share a story with you that I've never told, because there's a reason why I put that in the film. So in that first year, in 2011, I was very fortunate to be invited to go to the White House for a Gold Star family members event. Beniva Jacquet, who has become like a second mother to me, she spoke at our wedding, and my wife and I, our wedding, and has been so involved in this journey from day one. And it was really important to her 14 years ago to have me as a guest. And I told her, I want to earn this moment. I didn't want to go. And she's like, no, you need to see this for yourself. You need to see what these families go through. So we spent a weekend in DC. We were at the White House. It's, you hang an ornament on the presidential tree, and you're immersed in this world. And yes, I needed to see it. And my God, did it change everything for me. And talk about perspective. The last night we were there, we're at the W Hotel. If anyone stayed there, if you look out the window, the White House is like right there. On the TV is Geraldo Rivera saying, we won, the pullout of Iraq. And he was at the gates, and there was like MRAPs and Humvees coming through or whatever. And I was sitting on my bed. Gold Star mother, Beniva, was sitting on her bed, and we were watching it. And I remember because she had the menu for room service in her hand because we were going to order dinner. And I looked at her, and she looked down, and she looked out the window at the White House. She looked at the TV, and she turned to me, and she was like, but what did we win? And I knew in that moment she was processing, because her son was killed in Iraq, what did my son give his life for, and how do I make sense of that? Because she wasn't buying what the newsfeed was packaging, right? This is somebody who's lived this, right? Whose son was killed in such a horrific way, thousands of miles away from home. And I didn't have the answer in the moment, other than to say what he was called to do. Cody always wanted to be of service to his country. He was very good at what he did. Very good. He was a team leader and I thought, well, that's a question worth asking in our film. Was it all for nothing? And my answer will always be, it was not all for nothing. It was not all for nothing. And you can peel back the onion in all the different ways you want to, of like, oh, war on terror, all the different things we've heard, and some of them known to be truthful. But to the individual, that calling is a very personal thing. And the answer for me is, it does count. And the lives that you impact, and again, because we don't get to choose, when I say we, those that volunteer, the conflicts you go into. And so that moment always stayed with me, and I felt that it was important for the folks that we represent on screen to know that I felt that way as the storyteller on behalf of so many hundreds of people I had sat in front of from all different walks of life, that it is for something. And that next morning, we walked around the National Mall and so on, and I was just really glad that I had spent that time with her, to be here, especially for that moment. Also because it was, I'd also had a chance to really open up about her son's service that she didn't know and wasn't aware of, because, the guys that served with her son are spread all over the country. And though she kept in contact with some of them, but to get into the more intimate details of his service. And she had told me that morning that she had never slept so good since the night he passed. And that'll always stay with me. And I do, for anyone listening to this or sees the film, you'll see that moment's earned in that conversation, that my character is willing to ask that, especially to a mental health professional who has not served, who has not been in conflict. Like, how do you answer that question?
What do you hope is the result of this movie?
I hope for veterans that see it, that they feel seen and heard, and that they know that they're not alone. Taking it a step further, that you don't have to suffer in silence, and yes, it is okay to not be okay. There's a line in the film that my wife in the film says, walking through the front door, she's referring to the VA in this scenario, can be the longest journey traveled for some. It's also to know that there's care there. There is care. There are folks that come to work every day that this is not a job to them, that they are all in. They are trying to positively impact the lives of others. There's other resources, whether it's the GI Bill for folks that haven't utilized it, to explore, what that next chapter might look like. But I think most importantly is to know that you matter, and to know that your service and sacrifice is acknowledged. And for civilians to understand that, I understand that saying thank you for your service for some folks, especially civilians, can feel like a hollow gesture to a veteran, but certainly for some civilians take a lot of courage to say. Pushing that conversation or that gesture further to say, how are you? How are you doing? What was your service like? And not to say that every veteran wants to get into a conversation with somebody about that, but to bridge that gap that we feel that I've seen, I've witnessed of the 1% of the country protecting the other 99%, right? Defending the other 99%. And I feel like we are more disconnected now, even with social media and smartphones, than we ever were prior, because it is an all volunteer military and civilians have the luxury to be disconnected by that. Not to say they want to be, but just saying that that's just sort of, whether it's by default, what has happened. And I witnessed firsthand the military community taking care of the military community. You see that a lot. And so my hope is to inform, entertain, and stir the soul, whether that's to go out and be of service to your community, especially if you're a civilian. You don't have to serve in the military to relate to the story. As you know, it's an ensemble film. By design, there's 6 sort of main supporting characters. My hope was always, as the storyteller, that you were able to identify with one of those characters, whether it's a military spouse, mental health worker, a Vietnam veteran, a civilian, former hockey coach turned cop, family members, because I wanted folks to see the impact of that service and sacrifice. And when we use the word hero, what that really means when we're talking about courage, So starting a conversation, a really meaningful conversation at the very least. And I've seen the impact that the film has made in the last year on the film festival circuit. I've held in my arms Vietnam veterans with tears in their eyes that have said thank you because they feel seen and heard. OIF and OAF vets stand up in front of a full auditorium and say, I wish I had this movie 10 years ago to show my family why I am the way I am, but why they are the way they are. I wish I could show my ex-wife this film. So to me, that is first and foremost. And if we can save a single life with this film, my God, that would be the greatest Hollywood success story that I could imagine.
Well, I can't give away the whole film, but we talked a lot about some of the core pieces. But I'll tell you, I laughed, I cried,
wow,
I empathized, I sympathized, identified with, I'd say damn near everything that was presented from all the various characters that you talked about, and to me, it hit home. Specifically, there's a part, and I don't want to give it away, and I won't, but I'll leave it with you.
Okay.
My youngest daughter, is named Izzy.
Whoa. Okay.
And this morning, as I was watching the film, she came into the room, and that was when I knew that this was a story we had to tell on this show. And so I look forward to Sheepdog being in the broader market, and I do know, not hope, I know that lives will be saved because of this film. And I thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell your story, and thank you for doing this.
Speechless. Thank you. Wow. The universe does truly work in mysterious ways, and thank you. Thank you for this honor, and thank you for your commitment to service and sacrifice, and your family's sacrifice, and using your platform to amplify the message of Sheepdog in this film, and we're just on behalf of our entire team that has worked so hard to try to bring this story to the world. Just thank you so much, and keep doing the good work you're doing. It's a tremendous honor. Thanks.
Praise.
Yeah.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast, an official program of the Green Beret Foundation. I'm your creator and host, Fran Rachopi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other long and short form content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow the Jedburgh Podcast and the Green Beret Foundation on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, or Threads. Send your comments and inquiries to fran@jedburghpodcast.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Media Channel and the Green Beret Foundation remain committed to supporting all generations of U.S. Army Special Forces and their families. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.